So I've finished the setup of my hero mountain, same way as the background mountains. And now that I have this all in here, it's time to start playing with the camera. So I'm just gonna create a camera, drop it in, and adjust my sun and sky. And we'll name these layers just to make it easy to keep track of. And scale up these background mountains a bit. So I have a pretty good idea of what I want my composition to be based on my thumbnail. But still, there's room for serendipity here. There's room for all of the details to come together and to push and pull things here. So just gonna rotate that mountain. And I'm gonna make a duplicate of that for the foreground. We don't need that to create a custom terrain for the foreground. So we'll just scale that down and flatten it. And I'm just gonna make another window to easily be able to see what the camera's looking at. I'm gonna be working 2:1. That's just my personal preference. And it still might be easier to go side by side, so let me just swap that around. There we go. So now I can start to actually adjust these terrains while looking at the camera and seeing what it's going to see. And for the foreground, I want some sort of path that leads us as the viewer into that hero mountain. So just playing with what's here. Can we rotate this in a nice way to get a nice transition from foreground to background? And we'll just center up this hero mountain. And I'm going to hide that right now just to make the renders go a little faster. And just focus on this foreground and midground. And we'll just let this render cook for a little bit. And this should be a fun part of this. You know, the assets are in there, they're looking good, and now we can just flip them around and see what happens and see what we can stumble upon. And I'm just going to load up, just because I think it's going to affect the composition quite a bit, especially in the foreground. I'm going to load in our Ancient Temples Kipash scene. And really what I'm looking for here is a couple foreground elements. I know I'm going to want that border in the foreground that really frames the scene. So I'm just going to go and grab a couple pieces that I think might work for that. We'll grab some of that rubble. That might help us. So I'll just hide the kit for now. And I'm just going to center the pivot on those things just so I can make it easy to bring up next to the camera. And grab these little components as well and just move them to the center of the axis. We'll scale them up a bit. I think it's helpful to do this foreground piece because I think it's going to affect where I want the terrain and how I want to frame up that mountain in the center. And I'm just going to frame up all three of these pieces, and then we'll do some test renders with each of them. We'll open up Redshift and let's try them out. I'm going to save snapshots of each of these so that we can quickly toggle between them. I'm just flipping through, see what I like. We'll just move this a little closer to camera. And let's test it out with the mountain. And already I can see that I'm going to have to rotate this mountain because it's taking up too much of that circle and not giving me a great silhouette in the center of there. Yeah, there we go. That's already looking a lot better. That's getting some really nice shape language, and I think that's a solid enough base that we can plan the rest of our layout around this foreground piece and that mountain. While I'm here, because I have that rubble ready to go, it's not going to affect the composition as much as I thought it might, but we can just drop it in there and place it while we're here. After this, we're going to dive into building out an actual temple scene and dealing with more of the hard surface type of models. But for here, we have a camera that's working nicely. Our terrain is blocked in a nice composition, and we have a good solid start for a nice 3D scene.